Wyoming Territory, 1883. The wind was already kicking up dust when the train hissed to a stop at the edge of the dry, cracked platform in Dry Creek Station. Selina Hart stepped down into the heat, one gloved hand clutching her small valise, the other pressed to her chest. Her heart pounded faster than the wheels of the train that had carried her west from Missouri. She kept her eyes on the crowd, searching for a broad-shouldered man with a red bandana, the only detail the man in his letters had promised. He was supposed to be waiting. He had written to her for months, promised marriage, a home, and a future. But the platform emptied. Cowboys, ranchers, and townsfolk all melted away into wagons and saloons, leaving only a few crates and the dry whistle of wind kicking grit into her skirt. The train gave another sharp hiss and rolled away, steel wheels screeching against the rails. Selina stood alone. She waited. 10 minutes. 20. Her gloves grew damp. He was not coming. Selina sank onto her valise, spine straight, jaw tight. Her corset bit into her ribs, but she did not loosen it. She had not crossed 3 states to fall apart in the dirt. Across the tracks, a man leaned against a fence post. His hat was low, shadowing his face, but his stance was easy, like he had been born knowing horses, dust, and silence. He watched her, then pushed off the rail and crossed with long strides, his boots scuffing dirt. "You waiting on someone?" he asked. Selina stood. "I was." "He is not coming." The man looked her over, not in a way that made her feel small, but like he was trying to read something between the lines of her face. "You a mail-order bride?" She nodded once, the shame burning hot in her throat. "I was." He offered his hand. "Name's Zane Calder. I own a spread about 6 miles west. You should not be standing out here in the sun." Selina stared at his hand. Large, calloused, honest, the kind of hand that knew work. "I do not know you," she said quietly. "No, ma'am. But I know what it looks like when someone's been left behind." Something in his voice made her look up. His eyes were the color of dark honey, steady and kind in a way that loosened something in her chest. "My name is Selina Hart," she said. "And I have nowhere to go." "Then come with me," Zane said. "I will not leave you standing in the dust." The wagon ride to Zane's ranch was quiet, the kind of quiet that did not ask questions before they were ready. Selina sat beside him, hands folded tight in her lap. She felt the sun on her face, the creak of leather and wood, the smell of horses and dry grass. His land stretched out wide, rolling hills. A barn. A small house with smoke curling from the chimney. A woman stepped out onto the porch with a baby on her hip and a boy trailing behind her. "That's my sister, Molly," Zane said. "She and her little one's live with me since her husband passed. We help each other." Selina looked at him. "You are not married?" "No, ma'am, never had time or trust." She looked back out across the land. "I came all this way to marry a man who never showed up. I do not know what I will do now." Zane glanced at her. "You do not have to figure it all out today. Just rest, eat, think." At the house, Molly welcomed her gently and handed her a cup of cool water. The little girl on her hip was named Flora, and she reached out chubby hands to touch Selina's hair. The boy, Frank, was shy but polite. That night, Selina sat on the back steps, watching the sun bleed across the sky. She heard the door creak behind her and felt Zane lower himself beside her. "You can stay here as long as you need," he said. She looked at him. "Why are you being kind to me?" Zane rubbed a hand over the back of his neck. "Because someone should be. And because I know what it's like to have nothing but the clothes on your back and a heart full of hope." Selina blinked quickly, then looked away. He hesitated, then added, "I do not make promises easy, but if you want, I could promise to be a friend. For as long as you need." Something in her chest cracked, soft and aching. She nodded. "I would like that." The next morning, Selina rose early and helped Molly with the breakfast. She gathered eggs, learned how to pump water, and swept the porch. She moved carefully at first, unsure of her place, but Molly's easy manner and Zane's quiet approval gave her space to breathe. Over the next week, she watched Zane work, the way he moved among the horses, the way he taught Frank gently, the way he carried Flora when she cried. He was good, steady, strong in a way that had nothing to do with muscle. One afternoon, she found herself laughing real laughter when Flora stole a biscuit and toddled off with it. Zane looked over from where he was mending a fence and smiled. Selina caught her breath. That night after dinner, Zane walked her to the steps again. "I do not mean to rush anything," he said, voice low, "but I have come to look forward to seeing you each day." She looked up. "Even when I do not know what I am doing half the time," he chuckled. "Especially then." She smiled, then sobered. "I do not know if I can trust myself to choose again. I thought I had chosen well before." "I am not him," Zane said. "And I am not asking for everything, just let me stay close. Let me earn your trust. I will not leave you standing alone." Selina reached out and touched his hand, not just because it was kind, but because she wanted to. "Then stay close," she said. Zane's fingers folded gently around hers. They sat in silence after that, the stars blinking awake overhead. And for the first time since she had stepped off the train, Selina felt like maybe, just maybe, she had arrived exactly where she was meant to be. The first frost came soft, threading white through the sage and turning the creek edges to glass. Selina pulled her shawl tighter as she stepped into the barn, the scent of hay and warm animals wrapping around her. Zane was already inside, brushing down a bay gelding with gentle, practiced strokes. He glanced up when she entered, his eyes catching the low morning light. "I didn't expect you up this early," he said, pausing to wipe his hands on a rag tucked into his waistband. "I couldn't sleep," she said, brushing stray hair behind her ear. "Thought I'd make myself useful." He tilted his head toward the empty stall beside him. "You ever muck out a stall?" She smiled faintly. "No, but I reckon I can learn." Zane handed her a pitchfork and nodded toward the pile of fresh straw. "Start with that. Take your time. Ain't a race." They worked in silence, the kind that felt companionable instead of stiff. She moved carefully, mimicking his motions, and he didn't correct her unless she asked. Her skirts caught once on a nail jutting from a beam, and she muttered under her breath, pulling the fabric free. Zane pretended not to notice, but his mouth twitched slightly. As they walked back to the house, Selina rubbed her sore palms and asked, "Did you always live on this land?" "No," he said. "My father came out from Ohio after the war ended, bought the first patch cheap, said he wanted sky enough to breathe again." She looked up at the endless blue above them. "Did it work?" "For a while," Zane said. "He passed on a few years back, left the land to me and Molly." Selina nodded, tucking the thought away. The idea of inheritance felt foreign. No one had ever left her anything but silence. Later that afternoon, Molly sent her down to the root cellar for a jar of preserved peaches. As she ducked into the cool dark, she heard the door above her creak. "You find him?" Zane's voice echoed down. "Still looking," she called, squinting at the rows of glass jars. "Do you always keep things so well organized?" "My mother was the one who started putting up food. She labeled everything. I kept the habit." Selina emerged into the golden light, peaches in hand. Zane stood waiting, sleeves rolled, arms dusted with flour. "Is Molly having you bake again?" she asked, surprised. He shrugged. "She says I don't sift proper, but I make a decent biscuit." Selina laughed softly, a sound she didn't expect to hear from herself so soon. Zane watched her, something unreadable in his gaze. "I was wondering," he said slowly, "if you'd walk with me tomorrow after chores." Her fingers tightened slightly around the jar. "Where to?" "Nowhere in particular. Just thought it might be nice to talk without a shovel in our hands." She hesitated, then nodded. "I'd like that." The next day, the prairie stretched out in soft golds and grays as they walked the trail behind the paddock. A hawk circled high overhead, its shadow gliding silently over the grass. Selina kept pace beside Zane, her boots crunching the dry earth. "Do you ever think about leaving?" she asked. "Sometimes," he said. "But then I look at this land and I remember how much it's already taken and given back. It's honest." They stopped near a stand of cottonwoods. Zane picked up a smooth stone and turned it in his hand. "What about you?" he asked. "If you could go anywhere, where would it be?" Selina looked out across the horizon. "Someplace like this, I think, quiet, solid, full of things that don't run out on you." Zane didn't speak right away, then he offered her the stone. "For your pocket," he said. "To hold on to when the wind kicks up." She took it, the warmth of it surprising. "Thank you." They began walking back, and she realized the silence between them no longer felt like something that needed filling. That evening, after supper, she sat by the hearth, knitting a row of stitches Molly had taught her. Zane passed behind her, brushing one hand briefly along the back of her chair in a gesture so quiet and natural it made her breath catch. He didn't linger. Just moved to the table and began sorting through the day's ledgers. But she didn't need more than that. Not tonight. Later, as she climbed into bed beneath a quilt Molly had sewn, she ran her fingers over the stone in her apron pocket. It was smooth as river glass and warm still from his hand. For the first time since arriving, she didn't dream of the station platform or the empty tracks. She dreamed of cottonwood trees and the sound of steady footsteps beside her. The wind shifted by mid-November, colder now, with a bite that clung to bone. Selina stood at the edge of the pasture, her shawl drawn close, watching Zane lead a skittish mare through a slow circle. The animal had been born wild on the northern flats and traded in a week ago, her eyes still wide with the memory of open land. Zane moved with her the way he always did, with patience, not power. Selina waited until he finished, then walked to meet him at the fence. "She's still full of fight," she said, brushing a strand of dark hair back beneath her bonnet. "She's got reason to be," Zane replied, looping the reins over a post. "A horse like that don't forget being roped." Selina rested her hands on the rail, her gloves worn thin at the fingertips. "Neither does a woman." Zane didn't look away. His voice was low, steady. "You don't owe me telling, but if you ever want to, I'll listen." "I know," she said. "That's why I might." They walked back toward the barn together, their boots sinking into the softened earth where snow had melted last week. Inside, Molly was stacking kindling near the stove, cheeks flushed from the cold. She looked up as they entered. "There's a letter come for you," she said to Selina, nodding toward the table. Selina's stomach tightened. She crossed the room slowly, untied the twine, and unfolded the single sheet. Her eyes scanned the lines, her face unreadable. Then she folded it again and slid it into her apron. "Everything all right?" Zane asked. "It's from the man who never met me at the station," she said plainly. "Says he had a change of heart, found work in Denver." "Hopes I understand." Zane's jaw shifted, but he said nothing. Selina sat down at the table, her hands flat against the wood. "It's strange. I thought I'd feel something, anger, relief, but there's just nothing." "That's something too," Molly said, placing a kettle on the stove. "Means you're done carrying it." Selina met her eyes, then looked to Zane. "I'm tired of waiting on people who don't show up." Zane crossed the room and pulled out the chair beside her. "Then don't wait. Choose what's here, what's real." Her fingers curled slightly against the tabletop. "I've been thinking about that." The next morning, she woke before the sun and stepped outside, her breath rising in clouds. The sky was still indigo, the stars fading slow. She walked up the ridge behind the barn where the land opened wide to the south. Frost clung to the grass, and somewhere in the thicket a grouse stirred. Zane found her there just after first light. "You're up early," he said, stepping beside her. "I needed to see the day begin," she said. They looked out over the land, quiet. "I used to think I had to be chosen by someone to have worth," Selena said. "That if I was left behind, it meant I didn't matter." She turned to face him. "I don't believe that anymore." Zane's eyes didn't leave hers. "You shouldn't. You matter because you're here. Because you stayed standing." She reached into her pocket and took out the river stone he'd given her. "I kept this. I think you knew I would." "I hoped," he said. She held it out to him. "But I don't need it anymore." He looked down at the stone in her palm, then back at her. "What do you want instead?" "I want a life that's made, not promised. I want someone who doesn't walk away when things shift. I want warmth and hands that stay busy for the right reasons, and—" She hesitated, then stepped closer. "And I want you," Zane called her. The wind tugged at her hem, but she didn't move. Zane took the stone from her hand and slipped it into his coat pocket, then gently caught her fingers in his. "I've wanted you since the day I saw you at that station, holding yourself like you were already bracing for the worst." He lifted her hand to his chest, just over his heart. "I'm not going anywhere, Selena." When he kissed her, it was slow and certain, like a man sealing a vow he'd waited too long to speak. Her hands found the edges of his collar, and she leaned into him with the ease of someone who knew she was safe. Below them, the house stirred the sound of Molly's voice calling for Frank to bring in firewood, Flora's laughter tumbling through the open doorway. Selena looked up at him, sunlight catching in her lashes. "I'm already home, aren't I?" Zane nodded, his voice rough with something too big to name. "You are." And there, with the frost breaking and the day beginning, they stood together, two people who'd been shaped by absence and found in one another a place to stay. The first snow came light, dusting the prairie in pale silver and softening the edges of things. Selena stood by the window in the front room, watching the flakes fall in slow spirals. The quiet in the house was different now, not the silence of waiting, but the hush of something beginning to settle. Molly's sewing basket sat open on the side table, a half-finished hem draped over the edge. Frank and Flora were outside with the dog, bundled in coats that Molly had stitched smaller from old ones Zane didn't wear anymore. Zane came in through the back door, stomping snow from his boots. He paused when he saw her by the window. "Snow's not sticking yet," he said, pulling off his gloves. "Ground's still too warm underneath." Selena turned from the glass. "It'll hold soon enough," he nodded, crossing to hang his coat on the peg. "I need to ride into town tomorrow. Supplies for the winter. Thought you might want to come along." She picked at a thread on her sleeve. "Is there enough room in the wagon?" "There's always room for you." She met his eyes, and there was something steady there, not needing to be named. The next morning came gray and still. The town was quieter than usual when they arrived, the streets half cleared of snow, chimneys puffing in every direction. Zane tied the team near the mercantile, and Selena followed him inside, the bell over the door jangling softly. She hadn't been back since the day she'd arrived. The shopkeeper, a man with thick spectacles and a limp, looked up from the counter. "Morning, Zane." "Morning, miss." Zane tipped his hat. "We'll need flour, oats, lye soap, and 2 pounds of coffee if you've got it." Selena wandered toward the back, her fingers brushing shelves of calico and jars of buttons. She stopped at a crate of books, second-hand and worn. Her hand hovered over a volume of poetry with a cracked spine. "You raid much?" Zane asked behind her. "Not lately," she said. "Back in Missouri, I used to sit in the schoolhouse afternoons, reading whatever was left behind." He picked up the book she'd been eyeing. "Take it." "I didn't bring money." his brow furrowed. "I didn't ask you to pay me back." She hesitated, then nodded once. "Then I'll read it aloud this winter and we'll both get our worth." Outside, as they loaded the wagon, an older woman stepped onto the boardwalk nearby. Her face was lined, lips drawn, eyes sharp under a bonnet trimmed in dark ribbon. "Zane Calder," she called. "You always did bring home strays." Zane set the crate down with more care than necessary. "Mrs. Denton didn't see you there." She looked Selina over. "They say she was left standing at the station like a mule no one claimed. Now she's warmed her way into your hearth." Selina's back stiffened. Zane didn't raise his voice. "She's earned her place here." "That's more than I can say for most." Mrs. Denton huffed and turned away, disappearing into the milliner's with skirts swishing. Selina climbed into the wagon seat without a word. Zane joined her, guiding the horses into the road. "You didn't have to speak for me," she said after a while. "I didn't," he replied. "I spoke for myself." They rode in silence a stretch longer, sun breaking briefly through the cloud bank. "My mother said a woman earns respect by how she stands when folks try to push her down," she said. "I used to think that meant never letting anyone help me." He kept his eyes on the road. "And now I think maybe it means knowing when to take a hand that's honest." He reached across and let his fingers rest lightly against hers. She didn't pull away. That night back at the homestead, she sat near the fire with the book open in her lap. Frank lay asleep on the rug, a carved wooden horse clutched in his hand. Flora snored soft in Molly's arms. Zane came in from the barn, his hair damp from snowmelt. She looked up. "There's a poem in here about a woman who thought her life was over, until she found a quiet field and someone who knew her name." He pulled a chair beside her. "Read it to me." She did, her voice low and even, the fire crackling between them. When she finished, she closed the book and set it aside. Zane leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You ever think about staying?" "I already did," she said. "The only thing left is what name I'll stay with." He looked at her long and full. "Then take mine." She didn't cry, she didn't flinch. She reached for his hand and held it between both of hers. "All right," she said. "Zane Calder, I will." Outside, the snow thickened, but inside the house the warmth held, and in the quiet they sat together, not waiting, not hoping, but belonging. The snow deepened through December, covering the fences in soft ridges and muffling the world to a hush. Selina kept her hands busy with Molly, stitching new linings into old coats and darning socks by the fire. The days passed in rhythm she had come to know well, wood smoke in the mornings, Flora's shoes thumping over floorboards, Zane's boots crunching past the porch before sunup. The wedding was held in the parlor on the last Sunday before Christmas. Reverend Halley drove in from Lander, his old gelding steaming in the cold. Molly pinned fresh pine boughs above the windows, and Frank arranged river stones in a circle around the hearth. There was no lace, no music, no crowd, just warmth, the smell of cinnamon, and a quiet that felt like reverence. Selina wore a dark blue wool dress Molly had saved from her own wedding trunk, taken in at the waist and let out at the hem. Zane stood square beside her, his jacket brushed, his hair combed back with water. When the Reverend asked his blessing over their vows, Zane didn't glance away once. Afterward, Frank brought out the pie Molly had been saving, and Flora clapped her hands until Zane lifted her up so she could see the crust. They ate with their chairs drawn close, and hands touching when they passed the plates. That night, when the house was quiet, Zane led Selina to the small room he had built on the north end of the house the year his father died. A quilt lay folded at the foot of the bed, and a shelf above it held a row of wooden carvings, small horses, a bear, a firefly. "I made them when I couldn't sleep," he said softly. Selina stepped inside and ran her fingers along the edge of one. "You never told me." There was no one to tell. She turned to him. "You have me now." He reached for her hand and drew her close. "I know." Their first winter together was full of small things: a cracked pail mended with twine, a storm that snapped the top rail of the west fence, Flora's fever that Zane rode 10 miles through snow to fetch medicine for. Selina learned to patch harness leather and drive the team when the ice made walking treacherous. She read aloud by lamplight, her voice steady even when the wind howled outside. By spring, the house had quieted into something permanent. The garden rose began to sprout. Molly's hens started laying again, and Frank took to carving his own animals, sitting beside Zane with his tongue caught between his teeth in concentration. One warm afternoon, Selina stood at the edge of the field, her hand resting on her lower belly. She hadn't told Zane yet. The signs had come quiet but sure. She waited until night when the fire had burned down low and the others were asleep. "I think," she said, her voice soft against the dark, "we'll need to make room for one more." Zane didn't move for a moment. Then he reached across the quilt and touched her cheek. "You sure?" She nodded. His hand slid down to cover hers where it rested. "Then we will." The months passed steady. Zane built a cradle from willow wood, smoothing each piece until it shone. Selina embroidered a blanket with blue thread, stitching late into the evenings as Flora slept curled beside her. Molly packed up the spare room and moved in next to the children, giving the baby space beside its parents. When labor came, it was long but sure. Zane stayed close, his hand in hers, his voice low and steady. At dawn, a girl was born, her hair dark and slick, her cry strong. Molly handed her over wrapped in Selina's finished blanket, and Zane took her like he'd been waiting his whole life. They named her Ruth. Come summer, the prairie stretched green beneath a sky wide and open with promise. Zane added another rail to the fence, and Frank helped, taller now, his shoulders squaring out. Flora followed Selina everywhere, her small hands always seeking something to hold. On a late June evening, they sat on the porch as the sun dipped low. Ruth slept in Selina's arms, her tiny fingers curled into the fabric of her mother's bodice. Zane leaned back beside her, one boot propped against the rail, the lines around his eyes soft with contentment. "You ever think about what might have happened if that man had shown up at the station?" he asked quietly. Selina looked down at Ruth and then at the field beyond, where the wind moved gently through the wheat. "I don't," she said. "Because I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Zane reached over and brushed his fingers along the back of her hand. "I love you," he said. She smiled. "I know, and I love you back." The porch creaked beneath them as the breeze carried the scent of clover and wood smoke. The sun slid low, casting gold across the land. They'd built together a place of work, of laughter, of second chances made real. And in that quiet, held close by the people they loved and the land that had come to know them, Selina and Zane sat with their daughter between them, their hands joined, their hearts settled. The long road behind them no longer mattered. What lay ahead was theirs. Always.